Things are heating up, not just in the temperatures, but also in the pre-season stakes as we reach the final straight before taking on Barnsley in a fortnight's time. Welcome to your pre-season catch-up podcast brought to you by Argyle Life and the Green and White podcast, where we have a range of talking points to come your way over the next, well, it'll be more than an hour because I know we're going to get some lively conversation over the course, certainly of the next 60 minutes at least. Joining me tonight, Graham, John and Sam. We will be discussing the trip to Austria that the two boys at the bottom had. We will then discuss Wednesday night's visit to Truro City, any other pre-season news that might or may not have happened. We'd talk about squad depth, and of course, there might have been an interview with the chairman on one of our other Plymouth Argyle podcasts this week. But Sam Down, as is always tradition on the Green and White podcast, why don't you kick us off? First of all, credit to you, John and Aaron, for that wonderfully well put together, highly professional vlog that we received from a train en route from Tyrrell back to Innsbruck last week. Why don't you fill us in on just how enjoyable your trip to Austria was? And I'm sure this will be the last time you mention it over the course of the next 9 months.
Yeah, well, that actually wasn't a vlog. That was an Ads Live podcast, Digital Ads Live. Obviously couldn't get it out because of Wi-Fi 4G not being very reliable. But yeah, there was a vlog recorded. It is actually yet to come out. I'll have to remind Aaron of that one at some point next week. See, we're still editing it. Yeah, it was a great trip. What can I say?
Is he still editing that just like he's still editing the quiz that was filmed about 18 months ago?
Oh, it was at least 9 months ago. I'll leave that one for Aaron. The vlog, I'm confident, will actually see the light of day. The quiz, I'm far less so. Anyway, moving swiftly on to not drop our esteemed host and leader in it. What were we saying? Yeah, great trip. I mean, there's only so much I can say really, because I've said most of it on the previous vlog and also on the live, Ads Live pod itself. I mean, there wasn't really much after that because the Argyle portion of the trip was very much done then. We literally got up then the following day, the Saturday morning, got a train over to Munich where we had a delightful kind of 28-ish hours in Munich, didn't we? Went out and a few of the boys went for a cycle. I bypassed on the cycle. I don't gonna have a quick nap and a catch up in the Airbnb instead, and I felt much fresher for it in the evening. Then we went out in the evening, went to the famous Munich beer hall, had a bit of a night out in Munich, went to the world's most overcrowded nightclub as well. I think we, collectively and a bunch of men in our kind of 30s and late 20s combined found that maybe we were slightly aged out of the demographic now for that nightclub, but we still had quite a fun time, didn't we? Some a few football classic songs, played a bit of Freed from Desire, and one or two others that I can't quite remember now. But we had a good time, and it was very much a fun in small doses kind of place, that one. And then the daytime, me, John, and Aaron got up, had a lovely swim in an open water lake in Munich, had a currywurst in a Munich beer garden. And just an all-round lovely time, and it was one of those that it was sort of I was ready to go home at the end of it because it was very tiring, but it was a great time when we were there. And yeah, then I went to Truro on Wednesday night. Am I still doing Truro as part of this run through, Joe, or am I coming back to you for that?
You carry on, Sam. Truro on Wednesday night.
Well, hang on. You missed out what you did on Monday and Tuesday, and I'm sure all the listeners are waiting with bated breath to hear about that as well.
Not a whole lot, certainly nothing Argyle related. Yeah, quite a lazy couple of days on Monday and Tuesday. And then what was I saying? Yeah, so Truro. Yeah, Joe, if you're going to give me an invitation to speak, you don't need to ask twice. So there we go. Yeah, difficult to judge, I think, just because pre-season is primarily a fitness exercise. Often some of our on paper better pre-seasons have led to worse seasons. I think the last season comes to mind for that. And some of our more slightly underwhelming pre-seasons have actually led to better seasons. I know that in the before the League One title winning season, we actually drew 2-2 with Parkway. So you can't ever get too much from it. But that being said, you can get a bit of a rough idea, certainly on stuff like patterns of play, preferred formations, preferred positions, and all that kind of thing. So I think it's very clear that it's going to be 4-2-3-1. It's going to be the predominant formation, because we've now seen that in both games, pretty much without variation. First half hour, I thought we were quite poor. Truro looked the better team in that first half hour. They really kind of cut through the midfield quite easily. I think the interesting sort of tactical quirk that I've noticed from the cleverly set up so far is that even though it's a 4-2-3-1, what he will often want is the fullbacks to really advance forward and to either hug the touchline to allow the attacking midfielders to come inside, or indeed for the fullbacks themselves to come inside. Now, by doing that, that pretty much leaves a back two, which obviously is very vulnerable to a counter-attack, as we saw Truro do. The way he aims to counter that is having one of the central midfielders then drop in to create a de facto back three. And essentially, although it's a 4-2-3-1, it can very easily transition into kind of a 3-4-3 or 3-6-1 almost, which is interesting. I do feel that works a lot better when Waiadu is on the pitch than not. I wasn't actually massively sold on Waiadu as a signing when he first joined. That's not to say I was writing him off. I want to make that quite clear. But, his last two seasons were being relegated with Fleetwood and then coming mid-table in League Two. Granted, one of their better players, but, not really a young kid anymore, not huge resale value. I was a little bit umming and ahhing about whether he was the best we could have got for that money. But that being said, I think now, having watched him play, I can see very much the role Cleverly wants to him. Is that he wants him to be that, because he was a centre-back largely for Fleetwood, he wants him to be that central midfielder who drops into a back three and allows the fullbacks to really go forward, either inverting or indeed running down the wing. So he clearly has a very good role to play in that regard. I do feel in the first half, with no disrespect to Malachi Boateng or Caleb Roberts, and I think both of them had some good moments going forward, neither of them were able to naturally slot in and replicate that role as well as Waiadu did. So that was why Truro, I think, opened us up so heavily in the first half. So I do think we want one more CM in the door. Tom Cleverly, in his post-match interview, did give mention to that basically he said there's no shame in going out on loan. He basically said, but when I was breaking through at Man United, I went out on loan 2 or 3 times, and it didn't hamper my overall progress. If anything, it enhanced my progress. So I think that those public statements were made with possibly Freddie and Caleb in mind. So I think we could see either of those to go out on loan, potentially, maybe both of them, and probably another central midfielder coming in on loan. That's my kind of gut instinct for how I see it playing out. I could be wrong. But in the second half, when Waiadu came on, certainly when Ibrahim came on, Ibrahim was very good. And Amici, he's got a lot of quality about him, hasn't he? It doesn't always work out that way. I remember thinking David Goodwillie was absolutely quality in pre-season, and he didn't really, produce it at all. Certainly anything like to the same extent in that season. But you can just tell he's got a lot of quality, Xavier Amici. The way he carries the ball, the way he moves the ball, his eye for a pass is incredible. And again, that's no guarantees he's going to perform well. But if he doesn't perform well, it won't be for lack of quality. So very excited about him. Excited about Ibrahim. Waiadu, I think, very much in no way a derogatory way a system player, but a system player who could be very important for our system. That's about it, really. Luca Ashby-Hammond made a very, very good save. There was still a couple of moments with his feet that I wasn't, too impressed by. But, yeah, certainly made one very good save after the sort of horror show in Austria. There's probably more I could say, but I should probably let the other people speak at some point, shouldn't I? So I'll wrap up now and hand back over.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because Ian on YouTube asked, "Are you doing the season review while you're in full flow, Sam?" Maybe we'll save your voice box for next week's show. More on that a little bit later on. I was down in Truro as well on Wednesday. I kind of, as you know, Sam, we probably have a little bit of a different view towards how the first half went. I thought Truro just made it incredibly difficult for us, as you said. They were hungry. It's obviously the biggest game of their pre-season schedule, and they wanted to prove a point. We got to remember, when we're playing Truro, there's a hell of a lot of youngsters in that team. Well, sorry, I say youngsters. They've all grown up now, but they were youngsters at Argyle. They want to prove a point to the club that never took them on. And we certainly saw that from one or two of them. And as you say, second half, it just had a different feel about it, Sam, didn't it? I'll quickly fire back to you on this one. It did have a different feel about it, that the second half team was more sharp, the running and the passing was more incisive. There was a more coherent display on show that suggested that it had more of a starting 11 feel about it for the opening day, didn't it?
Absolutely. And I think really when we brought on the kind of big guns, the Ibrahim Weirdu, Amici, Mumba, of course, we really took the game away from Truro. We completely dominated. And the only pretty much chance on goal Truro did have was just very much the classic, just scored, loss of concentration, didn't pick a man up in the box at all, and they fired it home for 2-2. That you can maybe put a bit more down to the mental side of it, I think, than any tactical shortcomings. But yeah, I am encouraged by the fact that, with all the caveats that pre-season doesn't really matter, I am relatively encouraged by the fact that we really kind of took the game away from Truro when the first 11, without wanting to be blunt about it, came on. The only change that I felt was for the worse was maybe Orsini for Peppel. I do think Peppel was comfortably the better of the two. First touch from neither was great, if I'm honest, but Peppel was a lot more involved, a lot better physically, a lot better at drawing others into play. But I do think now, having seen both of them in both pre-season games and also open training, with all due respect to both of them, and I'm sure both of them will develop well, we are absolutely clearly in the market for a new number 9. Tom Cleverley has said that, and you can see why we are. I just hope that if either of those two are called upon to deputise for any length of time, because naturally, nobody's going to play 46 games a season unless I think Paul Watton and Graham Coughlin did it in the title-winning season once, but that's about the only time it ever has been done. Certainly not as a striker are you ever going to play 46 games a season. I'm sure some smart aleck can probably find one time where it's happened, but it virtually never happens where a striker will play every game a season. So I am a little nervous about those two. I'm going to be honest. I hope they can really step up and prove me wrong. At the moment, you need your number 2 to be able to be ready to start 15 to 20 games in all competitions, and I'm not sure really if either of them are quite yet ready to be a number 2 backup striker. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that one of them does really step up to that level. But yeah, we clearly need a new number 1 striker, and I would possibly even venture that another backup striker wouldn't be the worst thing in the world either, but we'll see.
On squad depth then, Graham, where do you feel we're at the moment? Sam says we're crying out for a striker. We obviously need goalkeeper. Sam wants another central midfielder. Where do you think we're at?
Well, we're 6 weeks from the time when the transfer window slammed shut. We've got 5 loanees to possibly fill places, and a lot of the Championship, Premiership sides haven't decided on their 25-man squad. So there will be time for quality players to become available and possibly either come on loan, or we might be able to pick up if they've got last year the contract. I really am. The worrying bit for me is the lack of height and physicality. I mean, we saw towards the end of last season how many teams like Mueslich played the long ball into the opposition half and play off the first and second ball. And we haven't got what I would call a ball-winning centre-back. If you think back to the last 2 promotion teams, we had Coughlin, and in the Shuey team we had Scar, who would win the ball, and Scar was deliberately recruited to do so. And similarly, we haven't got anybody, what I call a 6'4", big hold-up type player who can make a menace and double up in defence for the long throws, which are going to be more prevalent next season, and for corners. So I think that's a real weakness. We went for Jatta of Notts County towards the end of the window last season. For me, he fits the bill. I see he played and scored for Notts County yesterday. so he's back playing, but he is suspended for the first 2 games of next season. But somebody of that ilk, which means, yes, that means spending a large 6-figure sum or even tipping into the 7 figures, is what we've got to do to get the number 9 and find out who's the best header of the ball as 6'3", 6'4" centre back. Get those 2. The goalkeeper, I think, is a worry. I mean, Sam's seen him play in both games. I don't know what you think. It's rather odd that they were making a decision allegedly on Thursday, and we haven't seen any sign of Ashby Hammond being signed. So I don't know whether that means he's in or he's out or we're looking. But it does seem as though Hazard is not going to be ready for the start of the season, and I'd be worried he hasn't played any games at all. Zach Baker's injured as well. So those are the 3 key positions in terms of what I would call signing acquisitions for fees. I think then we can follow that up with quality loanees, and as we remember in previous seasons, generally, but not always, the loanees have done pretty well for us. So I'm not so worried. I mean, I don't know if anybody's been looking at the BBC transfer listings, but there were only 13 signings last week in League One, and only 3 for a fee out of 24 clubs. So it seems to be a lull at the moment, and I'm sure every fan, every other club, including Cardiff, who've signed nobody yet, will be equally as worried, if not more so than we are. We've signed 9. On the face of it, most of those look decent players. There's some development players within them. I think Oseni would be one of those. I think Peppel would be the number 2 back up to the number 9 and possibly playing the 10 role. So we're getting there, but as everyone would say, we're 2 weeks away and we're not there yet.
Absolutely. And John, Cardiff, of course, have got that wonderful tactician in Brian Barry Murphy. I'm sure he won't be at all concerned that the lack of signings, because he's such a great guy and somebody we absolutely should have taken a look at. Hint of sarcasm. Where do you sit, John? I think Graham makes a very pertinent point there about, Premier League teams are yet to really find their feet, and of course those top young sort of 21, 22-year-old talents that you see go out on loan, they won't be made available until those teams have relevant cover and know they're not going to be needed in their match squad. Is it perhaps time just for a little bit of patience on the grand scheme of things, given we are still a fortnight away? Like, it's not as if, we're going to have to make a raft of signings the night before, or that's it. Where do you sit as we are right here, right now?
Firstly, I won't be drawn into starting another agenda with the club before the season has even begun. I'll allow my agenda from last season to I don't know how that one's going for them, by the way. But anyway, I'm sure people who follow the championship might have an idea. I actually broadly agree with Graham. Before we get on to Sam having an enormous blow up about our lack of ambition and terrible transfer strategy, I think I'll offer another one on the kind of more measured side of the spectrum. I was actually looking down the transfer market, or transfer mark, however you're supposed to say that out loud, website page for League One signings. So a bit like what Graham was saying with the BBC, but this one was just listing all of the clubs and the business that they've done. And it's kind of an unreadable page because as part of the ins and outs, it includes players who were on loan last season who have then returned to a club or left a club. And that makes it a little bit hard to sort of judge raw numbers just at a glance. But I was actually surprised by how good our business looked in comparison to some of the other clubs. And I think that context is important. Huddersfield have signed quite a few eye-catching players, but on the whole haven't done quite as much business as I maybe thought from just kind of hearing ambient noise about how impressive their transfers were. Definitely a couple of good players going in there, but maybe not a ton to worry about. Blackpool have also done notably very good business. But aside from that, I mean, Luton have signed a couple of good players, as you would expect for a club with parachute payments still from 2 years ago in the Premier League. But also they have, like us, lost quite a lot of players, as you would expect. So there's quite a lot of turnover there. I don't look at the rest of the league and think that, there are tons of really high quality, expensive signings going on and that we're being hugely left behind. There doesn't really seem to be a ton of money changing hands at all, as Graham has said. In fact, some of the more eye-catching pieces of business I think have been done on frees or low amounts. And I try to sort of take myself out of being an Argyle fan and just sort of think about the list of signings for us as a fan of another club. How would you evaluate that? And I think there are some pretty eye-catching names in there, right? I think if you're a fan of another club, you'd probably look at Jamie Patterson and think he was somebody who's had a very good career in the Championship, and this is really his first time sort of dropping down below that level, at least in this country. And I think you'd think that was a good piece of business. I think you'd look at someone like Wiradoo and think that's a name that I've heard, a lot over the last couple of years of following the EFL, of somebody who's been a real stalwart for a different club. Unlike Sam, I don't really attach much meaning to him playing for Fleetwood because there are good players and poor players at every club. And I don't think playing for a club that's in League Two is necessarily a knock against him being good enough to play for us. And obviously then there are some in there that are a bit less known quantities for us. So I think the sort of mass freak out that our fans seem to be having is way over the top, personally. That doesn't mean that I'm not a little bit frustrated. I do think it's legitimate, and we'll come on to Hallett's pod later, to interpret certain comments that he made at the end of the season as quite discordant with the transfer strategy that we have subsequently seen. I don't think it's unreasonable that fans were sort of expecting us to go around sort of throwing our weight around and maybe kind of trying to sign the best players at this level for more money. So I'm not actually necessarily sure that's the best approach. And unlike Sam, I don't necessarily think that you have to spend £10 million on a player for them to be good. And if it turns out that we've spent very little money and all these players are really good, then obviously that's the best of all worlds. But in seriousness, to Sam's point that the higher transfer fee does often seem to correlate with better quality, I'd maybe have hoped for us to sign a couple more sort of players for, not necessarily for more money again in the sense that that's the only yardstick, but a couple of players who would maybe justify that type of transfer fee just to sort of augment the level of the other, I think, very good signings that we've made. And then, as Graham said, clearly that, Graham and every other fan, clearly that number 9 position we are short. I would personally rather get the right person than panic buy someone. And, there have been rumours going around about certain players and certain transfer fees. It could be complete rubbish, but if it's true that Burton Albion were trying to hold us over a barrel for £1 million for a guy who scored 10 goals in League One last season, personally, I'm not too sad that we have moved on from that, if that's true. That was someone who, by the way, I wasn't feeling very bad about us signing him as a general principle. But, I think we do need to be careful not to be ripped off. But there is a balance, and obviously if the season starts and we do only have Peppel and Aseni on the books in that position, that is going to hamstring us in those opening games. So, the longer it goes on, the more it seems like we maybe have to compromise. But I have no doubt the club are working really hard behind the scenes to try and identify that striker position. And and for me, that's obviously the very big one. I agree also, obviously, with what Graham said about the defence. I'd also maybe like another sort of attacking midfielder in the mix, possibly someone who's maybe a little bit of a different profile to the other ones that we have. Just someone who might sort of elevate our creativity there. But on the whole, I feel generally pretty good about where we are, given how much turnover we've had. And certainly better than the next person you're going to hear from, I think.
Well, we're not going to come to him just yet, but we will go on to Sam Down's views in a second, because I'm going to move it on to that interview that we'll be discussing in great depth.
Joe, could I just make one point on transfer?
Yeah, carry
on. Money. I think it's quite instructive that in January last season, Huddersfield were fourth, and all their fans were clamouring, we need to make 2 big signings up front. They did. They paid £3 million for Joe Taylor from Luton, and I think that's the 4th highest fee ever paid for a League One player. And they signed Dion Charles for £900,000. The end result was they went from 4th to 10th, lost the manager, and I think Taylor scored 2 goals in 15 games, and I'm not sure I think Charles got 1. So I understand the marquee signing argument. I understand pay fees, but that is a salutary lesson that, well, certainly buying in Germany is not the best idea, but fees of that magnitude do not necessarily equate with success on the pitch.
And let's be fair, Huddersfield would have had success on the pitch had they kept the perfectly good manager they had at the time last year instead of hastily pulling the trigger, as we all know, don't we, John? Let's quickly sandwich a few more news segments in before we come to the interview, because it has been a busy week to 10 days in the Argyle news scene. 8 apprentices have stepped up to the academy for the forthcoming junior season. In amongst the academy, featuring amongst those 8 are 2 of the players that me and Graham would have seen in last year's FA Youth Cup run, including Seb Campbell, who was a very free scoring attacking player in that side. Joe Nwaro is another one, and one Leo McCormick, who appears to be growing exponentially, and I'm a little bit worried what sort of height he's going to reach by the time he stops growing. So congratulations to all of them. There are 3 massive club events for supporters to get involved in coming up over the course of the next week, 2 weeks, and even into August. We have an evening with Tom Cleverley kicking off next Thursday, I believe it is. Is it next Tuesday at Home Park? The evening with Tom Cleverley, followed up on the Thursday night with a fans forum, something me and Graham are well accustomed to as a fans forum at Home Park. I will not be at this one, unfortunately, but I will be tuning in as best I can. And then there's an open training session. I know the time and date has been jiggled about with this a little bit since, but all details can be found on the website and on social media for that if you want to go along to that. And Argyle women, it's been a busy time for the Argyle women at the moment. Obviously, Marie Hurahan has come into the football club from Stoke City, and she's brought a whole raft of new signings into the Argyle women's team. They've had a very promising start to pre-season as well, with a couple of wins. They did get a win earlier on this afternoon against Cardiff City, I believe. So the best of luck to them. Their fixtures are now out on the club website as well. And an exciting new partnership has been struck between Argyle women and Torquay women. Torquay women, who have just appointed former Argyle head coach Ryan Perks as their new manager. They've come up with a new strategic partnership that will enable a designated pathway for players in the areas, supported by both sides to bring through the best emerging talent, and there will be shared commercial opportunities and best practice across all areas. So congratulations to Argyle and Torquay for striking that up, and let's hope it's only beneficial for the women's game in the region. So, half an hour in, over 1,200 people giving up your Sunday night to watch us ramble about a podcast interview that was given by the Pilgrims podcast, released on Monday and Wednesday morning. This was with Argyle chairman Simon Hallett. If you haven't listened to it yet, you can do so via all the necessary platforms that Pilgrims podcast operate on. It is something that we've all listened to. It's something we've all taken great interest in, as we should when the chairman speaks. So congratulations to them for getting the interview and getting the airtime with Simon. Let's kick it off then. Who should we come to? Because I think we've got somebody on one side of the argument, somebody on the other side of the argument, and perhaps somebody in the middle. So which side of the argument should we go to first? Graham, why don't you kick us off? We'll let Sam just wind himself up gradually. We don't like a coiled spring. You don't want him to go off too soon. Why don't you talk to us about before we get into the nitty gritty and various talking points of the interview and soundbite Simon Hallett said. What did you think of the interview and how Simon conveyed himself in the discussion?
Well, he's always been very open and honest in those podcast interviews. I think it's the second time he's done it with Archie, and I think you get much more out of them than you do from a fans forum, where the focus is on you live and you're cautious about every word you say, because many people try and misinterpret or interpret things the way that they want to think. So yeah, open and honest. I mean, there's 2 things. One thing to bear in mind, and he said, our turnover next year is going to be 20 million. Last season was 30 million. So that's a 33% drop in turnover. That's an adjustment that the club have got to make. He also said the club had made a profit from last season, and that's largely down to the player trading, which has been slowly growing, but was fairly successful with Lewis Gibson, Morgan Whittaker, and a couple of others that added to the pot. What we don't know is I doubt whether that was lump sum. I imagine it was instalments. So we don't know how much that has gone into a transfer pot for this season. But assuming that, a sizable proportion, I think it's not. I think he said in the past 50-50. Then we have got a transfer pot. He also mentioned about playing budget. I'm not sure if he specifically said top 6 in this podcast, but that seems to be fixed in most people's mind, and we may well be. But when we won the championship at the start of the season,
Graham, just for context, the top 6 budget thing came from Hallett's appearance at the last fans forum, where he said if we get relegated, we will have a top 6 budget in League One.
So and playing budget, that's excluding transfer funds. So that's the general context of where we are, and I think we probably will be there or thereabouts, top 6. When we won the championship with 101 points, our starting point, according to Shuey, and it was publicly expressed, was 13th or 14th. So the correlation between playing budgets and outcomes is not as strong as it would be in the Premiership and the Championship. Although last year, clearly Birmingham, with £25 million spent in fees and whatever they spent on wages, and clearly that cemented the correlation. So top 6 budget, some money to spend on transfers, which I think we've probably spent getting on towards $1 million now. I think so. So that's fine. The principal issue is investment, and I mean I have spoken to Simon privately about this, and his main fear is not who he sells to, but who that person sells to subsequently. And he's absolutely right to have that thought firmly in his mind. And I think that's why he wants to go down the minority stake route, which ironically is how he got involved with James Brent minority stake. And then when the need was there, he stepped up to the plate and probably spent much more than he ever intended in doing so, to the tune of something like 30 million in total. And we are where we are now. So the minority stake brings a lot of challenges. And if I look at John Textor at Palace, not the best of examples, but he had 46%, but only 25% of voting rights. And Steve Parish had 10% and had the final say on decisions. And I thought, well, that's a crazy situation. So trying to find a large minority stakeholder to put money in is going to be a real challenge. The other thing is, if you look at the club, we've pretty maxed out on off the field, hospitality. So it's not what I would call opportunities for growth that investors normally look for when they come into a club. So the investor's got to basically pay for the lumpy infrastructure, the first team HQ at Harper's, the possible filling in the corners or some other extension to the ground. And that in itself isn't going to be revenue generating because there's a lumpy expenditure and you might increase the capacity by 2,000 or 3,000. So it's a huge ask to find somebody who wants to do that. The alternative is to sell to somebody who wants to take it all. Possibly with Simon as a minority shareholder, that means somebody's got to put in 30 million plus. And that's a quantum leap that I feel uncomfortable with. I think everyone else should, because if you cast your minds back, Paul Stapleton selling, the Kagami situation, and then we had Roy Gardner and that idiot Keith Todd, who just ran the club down. And within a year, from being in a positive position, we were on our knees and nearly out of existence. And this is why Simon's being cautious. And I commend him for being so. I mean, if he's had 70 expressions of interest and it's whittled down to a handful, and then he goes along with somebody who he thinks is going to meet his requirements and then fails you said they were opaque. Opaque means they didn't come up with the money that they said they had, or that money was borrowed. And the last thing we want to do is get somebody who's buying the club with borrowed money, who's then answerable to lenders, because that's what happened with Lombard, Keith Todd and Roy Gardner. So I understand the clamour for more investment. There must be somebody. Yes, there must be somebody. It's an endless search, but it's got to be the right one in the right context. Hopefully there is a minority investor, but there aren't many. I don't think there are many at all. And the world economy, particularly in America with Trump and all the rest, the value of the dollar against the pound, that's all changed. So I think he's probably decided, well, we'll just let it take its course. If somebody comes along, fine, but we're okay for another season. If we get back in the Championship, I think it will then be game on for minority investors, or even with a stepping stone to full ownership, because then with freakish season, you could be in touching distance to the playoffs, 1 in 4 chance playoffs. Somebody's going to take a punt on that. But in a League One where there's not much opportunity for growth in the turnover of the club, I think it's less likely. So I'm happy where we are. I'm happy that he's in charge. I'm happy that he's had a very difficult few months, as he's said, and he's getting through that. And I just hope we can have a successful season based on paying out money for transfers, and let's see where we are at the end of it.
From the balanced, calm, composed thoughts of Graham Clark to Sam Down. Sam, your thoughts on Simon Hallett's interview with Pilgrim's podcast. A generic overview here. Doesn't have to go into elaborate detail, just a generic overview.
Do I detect an undertone of home bias in that description and that contrast? I'm not going to stand here and rant about it like Joe is clearly geeing me up to. Well, maybe I am a little bit, but not maybe to the extent Joe is geeing me up to. What I want to say first of all, before anything else,
Sam, think of the content.
Yeah, I'm not Aaron. What I want to first of all say, which Graham alluded to, is I'm more important than anything else that the family issues, personal circumstances he's been having are seemingly in a much better place and on the route to being cleared up, as Simon himself alluded to at the very start of that podcast, and that's far more important than anything else we're about to talk about. So with that in mind, I will now go on to the substantial content, and I will absolutely try and keep it under 5 minutes from here on. Anyway, honestly, I was listening to it. I made some extensive notes about it. There were, honestly, parts of it I found myself nodding along to and agreeing with. There were also some parts of it I found myself kind of slightly tearing my hair out at, if I'm completely honest about it. First of all, I want to absolutely clarify, not at all at Archie and Tom. They did a great job in getting Simon on and having that insightful interview with him. I want to make that very clear. This is not a podcast war at all. And I like both of those people, so it's actually not on them. The bit that I was slightly tearing my hair out on was not even necessarily some of the answers, but the implications of some of the answers. If I'm being honest. So the bits that I liked were, and I want to say this first and foremost because I was always very consistent about the fact that I felt under Muslich, as much as he was a good coach, I was very unapologetic to the point that Joe and John, and maybe to a lesser extent even Graham and many others, all kind of ripped the proverbial out before, that I felt we had kind of abandoned our style a little bit in going for Muslich. As much as he was a good coach, and he actually did a much better job of us than I predicted he would, and by the end he won me round to being actually quite gutted that he left. All that being said, we shouldn't have appointed him. And I think the reason why Archie asked him, do you regret appointing Muslich rather than do you regret appointing Rooney? Because we know he regrets appointing Rooney. That's an obvious question.
Do we? Seriously, do we?
Yeah, he has said as much, in effect.
Okay.
Yeah, he has said as much in interviews. But I think we know he regrets appointing Rooney. Regretting appointing Muslich, I think, is a more nuanced question that there could easily be a yes or a no to. And I think, honestly, he came as close as he was ever going to get to saying he wished he hadn't appointed him without outright saying it. Is what I took from Simon's answer there. I think he's never going to come out and outright say we should have appointed Shuey. But I think that was as close as he's ever going to get to saying that. And I appreciate Graham nodded at the first bit, but maybe not when I mentioned Shuey. So we'll infer from that what we will.
Sam, just to let you know, you've got 2 minutes of your already imposed 5-minute embargo.
Yeah.
So don't ramble for the next 3 minutes about why Stephen Schumacher should have been appointed.
No. Yeah, okay. So I think that was good. Basically, what I think was good is the fact he said that changing the style of football the way we did was too much, and we're not going to do so again necessarily. I do agree about the thing about the pertinent point being not who we sell to, but who they sell to, and there is a problem with that with private equity firms. And that is a very valid point. And honestly, one that I, in my very limited financial knowledge, hadn't really thought of, and I think that's a very valid point. What I was a little bit more disappointed about, and what I would have, again, with absolutely no disrespect to, to the two hosts who were probably, limited maybe to the extent they could push him as a friend and a guest on their pod. What I would have liked to have followed up on a little bit is the football restructuring in terms of the off-field side. Whatever you think about Hallett, Parkinson, Dewslip, head coach, that was the old format. It was quite straightforward. One answer to one answer to the other, and it went up to the top. Now we don't have that sort of vertical clear structure at all. We have a head coach who has presumably more responsibilities because that was what Miron negotiated before swiftly, sodding off, essentially. We have a head of recruitment who, according to Scott Coyne, who remembers him, by the way, was hired to act as almost like a pseudo director of football. We have David Fox, head of football operations, who I think, reading between the lines of Simon's comments, is more of an administrative role and less of a strategic role, shall we say. So, we have Fox, we have Randall, we have, the head coach themselves, obviously formerly Muslich, now Cleverly, who all have some director of football responsibilities. We have Parkinson as the CEO, who presumably also takes over some of the responsibilities. And we have Stuart Webber drifting somewhere in the midst of that as an intermittent consultant. So, you know what I mean? It's kind of like a big, shall we say, I don't want to use the word blob of a structure, but that's the only word I can think of for it. Right? It was a clear vertical structure. Now it's a little bit less of an obvious structure, certainly. And I
Dominic
think,
Cummings.
Yeah, I think now we would have. I would have wanted to, and I hope somebody at the fans forum does ask why we changed to such an approach. And I think honestly we know why. It was because that was what we had to do to keep Miron here, even though it didn't keep Miron here. But why we then have maybe kept that change in place. And I think what Simon did say that I found very insightful is that he changed the job title from director of football to sporting director because Neil Dewsett, for all the good he did, was far more football and very little director. And that I understand completely because he wanted somebody to not just set strategic direction, but also take over the administrative side of the club. That much I get completely. What I don't get so much is why from going from director of football to sporting director, which I think was explained very clearly, why we then have gone from down to head of football operations, which is a different job entirely. Oh, and by the way, we've also got a consultant who's here for a few months. We've also got a chief scout who does director of football jobs. And that to me just doesn't quite make sense in terms of the structure. The final point, because I know that some people in the comments are already saying I need to wrap up, and I have probably just about passed the allotted 5 minutes. My very final point is about the playing budget. And I absolutely, completely take on board all Graham has said about, 2011, I was there in the midst of it. So was Graham, fought to a far greater extent than I was. I absolutely get with all of that why you wouldn't want to do anything that remotely sets the club down that road again. But that being said, I feel there has to be a happy medium between run a huge budget surplus every season and bankrupt the club, right? Because what I would point out is that at no point whatsoever in the Simon Hallett tenure have we been required that great English, dependent, that's what I'm looking for, dependent on loans, debt, anything like that. The money that has been ploughed in has all been for increased shares. It's not been a loan that we have to pay back. And that's absolutely a good thing, to be clear. We don't want to leverage the club against unsustainable debt. Any debt is a problem to some extent. You can make the argument that some small amounts of debt are manageable, but we certainly don't want to leverage loads of debt against the club. But we're now in a position where the 2022 accounts showed 5 million in cash reserves. The 2023-24 accounts showed, I think, about 10 million in cash reserves. Whereas now I think the cash reserves are going to be far larger still, and we've actually run at a big profit with all the players we've sold over the past 12 months and the compensation we got from Muslich and all the staff. So the money is absolutely there. The money is there to spend without running any debt at all. There is no real reason in my mind why, and I don't think it would be in any way a betrayal of our philosophies, of our principles, that we can just go out there and be the kind of Middlesbrough of League One and just sign everyone else's best players. Because I think we've got the money there to do that. I really do. That we've got the money there to pretty much sign
players like Caleb Watson, Bradley Ibrahim, you mean?
Well, sure, yeah, but to an extent. But they were both two of the better players for teams that were down the bottom of the league, and I think that was partially an enactment of that. But I honestly look at the team man for man, and I think I don't think any single one of these players, without wanting to pick on him, maybe a Seeley, but even then he's a development player. I don't think any one of these players is not good enough to be backup. And I think what Ian Holloway famously once said is that it's a squad game, not a team game. You have the people who bring the piano onto the stage, and then you have the pianists, because you have to have the support, and then you have to have the star men. But at the minute, we've got a whole team of people who carry the piano onto the stage, and we don't appear to have any pianists, and that's the problem I've got.
That's up there with one of the very best endings of a rambling we've had on this podcast. John, you seem to sit through part of Sam's interlude sort of quietly nodding away in some agreement of what he said, and then some of the times you looked utterly bewildered with what was his opinion. Where do you sit on this? Because I come to you last, because I kind of feel like you're perhaps the happy medium between these two sides of the debate here. You can very much see both sides of it.
Yeah, it comes to me to once again be the person who sits on the fence and gets splinters in my arse. I think, like, on a macro level, I agree absolutely with what Graham said. And to be clear, I'm not sure Sam totally disagrees with this either. I think we are enormously lucky to have Simon Hallett, and that does not mean he's perfect, but it does mean that all of the people on social media who are sort of somehow wishing for a different owner, I think you just have to be so careful what you wish for, because most football owners are terrible, and he is very good. I absolutely sympathise with the point he made on the Pilgrims podcast about how he gets frustrated when fans question his motives. I think his motives are entirely in the right place. I think he has ultimately massively taken the club forward since he took over. Obviously, we are now back in League One, so there is if we finish, I think, as our colleague Dan Ellard has put it, below 7th in League One, we will have technically done worse than we did in that Derek Adams season after coming up from League Two the last time around, which you could argue is sort of the Hallett era coming full circle, if that does happen. And obviously, to be clear, it hasn't yet. But football has moved on a lot. Obviously, we've had all those experiences in between times, just at a minimum. But also, at bare minimum, he's taken us from being a club with the resources of a sort of lower end League One club to a club which should be aiming to get back in the Championship at the first time of asking. And I think he deserves enormous credit for that. I also think that he's been judged a little bit unfairly on, I guess you could argue he's been a victim of his own success a little bit, right? He had a string of pretty much unbroken success after that relegation very early in his tenure under Derek Adams. But we got straight back up from that, albeit with potentially a little bit of an assist from COVID in that weird season. And since then, it has been solid year-on-year progression until last year, as we all know. And since then, or obviously, I think you could probably cast it back a little earlier and since Shuey left, things look like they've been a shambles at times. But actually, on the whole, I think Hallett is the sort of person, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he's talked like this on a number of occasions where, in his line of work, for example, if you sort of take a risk and it pays off 50% of the time, then you consider that to be a relatively good bet, actually. He was never going to continue to kind of, score 100% of his decision-making as he did for 3 or 4 years. That was kind of a fluke, and there were going to be decisions that were inevitably going to come along that were going to look that were going to cast us in a bad light. And so, I think it can be far too easy to think that we have just kind of lost our way totally, when actually, if these sort of periods of success and failure had been a bit more kind of intermingled with each other rather than getting up to the Championship and now falling back to where we are, it it would maybe look a bit different, even if it was the same kind of hit rate of success and failure. That being said, I found aspects of what he said a little bit strange. First of all, I thought it was strange that they spoke for over an hour or so, and there was no mention of Wayne Rooney whatsoever. Now, maybe he has addressed Rooney. I can't exactly remember what he said about it, but I don't know if he's addressed Rooney publicly at any great length. And I don't want to give him too hard a time on this because I was one of the idiots who decided to make a sort of defense argument for hiring him last summer. There is no question in my mind that to the world of football, if we have gone in some people's eyes from looking like a club that's very well run to a club that, you know, is a bit of a laughing stock, it is purely on that decision. It was a decision that to sort of football fans, at least of other clubs, looked risible and like it was obviously going to fail. And again, I think at the time it's a bit overly simplistic to say it was guaranteed to fail, but essentially what a lot of people predicted would happen did happen, and there was clearly a very, very big risk that would happen. I personally don't feel like there's been enough of a public accounting for the damage that decision did to our reputation. And so I found it a little bit strange, even if he's not the most recent manager, that there was absolutely no discussion of him on the pod whatsoever. And that leads on to also thinking that he was harsh on Muslic, and therefore, I guess, kind of harsh on himself for hiring Muslic. He, as Sam mentioned, came very, very close to saying he regretted it without actually saying it. Seemed to suggest on a couple of occasions that Muslic didn't really improve us at all in a way that you could disaggregate from the fact we signed players who sorted the defence out. I think that's massively underselling the job that Muslic did. Yes, we did ultimately go down, but he massively improved us. I don't think if Muslic was still the manager here that Hallett would be talking in anything like those terms. And in fact, I actually suspect that he doesn't really believe that Muslic did anything other than a pretty sterling job here. To me, it seems like on that one, you could have taken much more of a victory lap and said, you know, we actually nearly stayed up because we made an appointment that people questioned, but it turned out to be quite good. And then he sort of behaved in a dishonourable way, and it's a shame it ended that way, but we wish him the best. To me, it actually just felt like a lot of post-rationalised kind of, well, actually, he didn't necessarily do that well, and actually, we didn't build the structure of the club around him going forward. I don't really think I particularly buy that, to be honest. And so I thought that was a little bit weird. I felt there was a little bit of a dig at fans for criticising release clauses for players, for not understanding how that works, or the fact that there have to be release clauses. I felt that was a bit patronising. I think that the word Hallett used where we might disagree is reasonable release clauses. And we discussed this on this pod, right? I think you could make a case that Lewis Gibson's release clause was reasonable based on what was reported, you know, in the sort of high, what was it, Sam? Like 1.6, 1.7 million?
1.5.
1.5, right. I wouldn't quibble with that for Gibson. Do I think that Hardy and Randall's release clauses, as reported, were reasonable? Personally, I don't. I think they were far too low, and I think we've discussed that before on this pod. But I wish he'd sort of engaged with that point in a little bit less of a sort of straw man way, because I think he sort of to insinuate fans don't understand that there need to be release clauses. I think overlooked what the main criticism of that has been, which is the level at which they have reportedly been set. I get maybe it would have been difficult for him to talk about that, given that these are to some extent confidential contractual details. So you know, there were things in there to criticise. I wish there'd been a fuller accounting on those points. And I just felt that also there was kind of a tone, particularly in the first episode, that was a bit like a little bit naive, maybe felt a little bit, oh, you know, we're the victims of this horrible, unscrupulous business of football. I guess I just wasn't really particularly interested in hearing that. I think I'd be more interested in us sort of using that unscrupulousness to our own advantage. I don't mean treating people poorly, but I mean maybe just playing the game with a bit more intelligence, because I do think that, again, while everything I said earlier completely is true in the fact that, you know, Hallett has done an amazing job for this club and put us in a much better position now to where we were, there have been individual decisions that have gone poorly. There have been decisions that were made in terms of recruitment in the last 6 months to a year that now look naive in hindsight. I don't know if he reckoned with those as you know, as fully as I might have liked. But it was a very interesting two-part conversation, and I guess we have to, even though it wasn't us, praise him for engaging with fan media at all, because there are some other owners who I think would be hesitant to do that. So it was good to hear him put his view across. And that's my excruciatingly even-handed. I liked the kind of general thrust of what he said, but there were some things that frustrated me. Analysis of the interview.
Yeah, and
I
just
for all the people in the comments saying that I'm no good at this because I ramble on too much. Know that rambling is very much a two-way street. I did see a comment, someone saying that Ben Brandt saying that I'm no good at this because it's too long and I should do some pre-planned scripted stuff. Well, Ben, did win podcast of the year 2 years in a row, not done counting. So please put your money where your mouth is and vote for someone else. Not John, though, because he's just as bad.
Can I just make a very succinct point on release clauses?
That would make a change for somebody on this podcast, Graham.
The release clauses would have been of a different value if they were still championship players.
Yeah, no, I get
That's
that,
the point.
but I still think they were too low.
Gibson's at 1.5 was because it was a championship player, and automatically release clauses go down. And so we should have negotiated them. Well, would we've got an extra year out of Hardy or Randall? You know what agents are like. Well, what Simon finds frustrating is, and he's learned the hard way, everything's skewed in favour of the players and managers. He has to honour obligations if he sacks somebody, but if they leave, the compensation that might be in a contract isn't always the one that you get because you've got legal issues to resolve. And he just took the view of Muslich, take what we can get and move on. Otherwise, it's going to be a big shadow cast over the season, start of the season. And similarly, you can't do it if there's a release clause in the contract and the agent is make it known to other clubs, you're done for. And yes, it was low, but they would have been higher value in the championship, and we wouldn't be having the discussion. So,
to which I would just quickly say, firstly, I agree with how he handled the Muslich situation. For what it's worth, I think that the explanation, while I was initially perplexed as to why we weren't demanding the full release clause, the explanation that I've heard both from him on that pod and then from people through other channels that we've heard is actually quite compelling. And I think basically we just got the best out of a bad situation with that. I would say, secondly, though, on the player release clauses, that again, I just think it boils down to what you think the number should be. I absolutely concede that we were not going to get championship fees for players if we've been relegated, and I completely understand why there have to be relegation release clauses. To me, the amounts that are rumoured,
with 1 year left on your contract as well.
I think the amounts that we have lost certain players for who we have put significant resources into developing, be it from the academy or just in recent years, have been derisory and have not reflected anywhere near what I would even consider to be a fair value for a League One club, let alone a Championship one. That's based on what's been reported publicly. We don't know, full disclosure. The third point, though, I would make is that this would all be moot if we had stayed up, which we would more likely have done if we hadn't appointed Wayne Rooney and this was not discussed. And I meant to say, actually, in my previous analysis, I think he offered we had to change the manager as a sort of mitigating circumstance in the season rather than something that was made necessary by making what in hindsight proved to be a terrible appointment. So I don't know. Those were the points that frustrated me. So I can't agree fully with you, Graham, but I won't agree fully with Sam either.
I think the thing about release clauses is, look, I'm seeing, and again, I absolutely, really listen, appreciate what Graham's saying and absolutely value Graham's opinion on this highly. But comment coming up from Darren Curtis saying Graham is the adult in the room. But again, it's not to undermine Graham, but I feel that's just like oversimplify and say that whatever you're almost saying that whatever the relegation release clause would be, it's acceptable, and that's not even what I'm necessarily saying Graham is saying, but talking about what some of the people in the comments are coming in almost as though, you hand wave it away, we're going down. I honestly think both sides of the argument have some merit. Yes, of course, agents are what agents are, and they will try and negotiate a release clause. And you know what? I kind of get it more with Hardy than what I do with Randall to an extent, because Hardy was actually out of contract at that time when he signed that deal. Randall had another year on his contract. Now, granted, yes, if we'd have gone down, he would have then been out of contract. But Randall was younger. Randall was, at that time, a better prospect. Although Hardy, you could probably make a strong case that Hardy had a better 2 years in the Championship for us than Randall did. At that time, Randall was just 22. He was seen as being a really promising young player who could go on to play at the top end of the Championship or even the Premier League, which, by the way, he still might. But at that time, it was a little bit more, wow, he's this mega exciting young prospect type, the sky's the limit for him. I don't see why in that scenario you would tie him into a deal where the reported release clause by many media outlets is in the region of 600 to 700k. Are you honest telling me that if we'd have put that contract in front of Adam Randall, whereby we said to him, right, your release clause in the Championship is 2.5 million, your relegation release clause is, 1 million, 1.2 million, that he'd have declined it? I really don't think he would have done. I absolutely get that it's a tough conversation to have, and that it's a brutal sport and people look out for themselves. But I wonder if we were just allowed ourselves to be sold a little short with some of those clauses. Hardy, I think, again, could we have made it $1 million upon relegation? Maybe. I think with Randall, we absolutely could have, because he was in contract for another year. He was seen as being a really high prospect. And if we'd have said to him, look, we want to offer you this, let's protect our asset. And you know what? If the agents and the players did come back and counter negotiate, what I would say is this. Okay, if we'd have sold Adam Randall for 1 point, let's assume it's 700k, because that's the figure that's widely quoted. If the relegation release clause had been 1.2 million, that's 500k more. Okay, if we offered him a contract that would say, £1,000 a week more over 2 years, what's that? That's £100,000 a week more we're paying him over the course of that 2-year contract. Even if we offer him 2k a week more, that's £200,000 more over the course of the contract. So even then, if we offer him a higher wage to incentivize him into signing the contract, and we sell him for 500k more, we're still 300k up on what we would have been in reality. So there would have been, I get what you're saying, but there would have been ways to mitigate the relegation release clause, I think, better than what we did. And I will die on that hill.
So can I just ask, do you know what the value of the release clauses are for other teams that have got relegated?
No.
Because the weird thing about this is how both figures came available. We don't hear about release clauses values for other clubs. There may be within their fans forums, I don't know.
Maybe that's
It's a bit weird that two players who got a year left in the contract suddenly have their release clauses publicly, I won't say announced, slipped out.
Yeah, leaked, yeah.
And and that would be a concern for me if I was the club, to be fair.
Well,
because otherwise we wouldn't be having the conversation. We only assume that the Gibson release clause was met because the fee was reported to be 1.5 million. That's the only way we knew. Before all this, release clauses weren't even in the psyche unless you're sort of, big Premiership player. So I'm just expressing a surprise that they came in. Do we know that they were 700 or 750? Do we know?
We don't know, but it's widely reported. And
well, it could be widely reported by somebody, and then somebody repeats it, and before you know, it's fact. So we don't know. It'd be interesting to find. I mean, we won't know until the accounts are out December next year as to what the actual fees were, if we can work it out. But I just think we just got to move on. They got release clauses. They were met. They didn't. I mean, the most pertinent thing is, for me, neither wanted to play for Argyle in League One, having got the club relegated. And I think we should bear that in mind. Particularly for Adam Randall, who the club. Let's not forget, when he probably signed the contract at the beginning of that, his latest, he wasn't a first team regular.
He was very much a first team regular after the title season.
But when he signed the initial contract that this may be, he wasn't a regular. Hardy, you can understand, but don't forget, he went through a barren spell. How many games did he not score? So just put it into context. We can get hung up about it. It's done, it's gone, move on, and let's spend what money we have wisely, and hopefully with better quality players that will give us the value and get us promoted.
Well, look, how we're spending the money is its own entirely separate question, and I kind of touched on that earlier. What I'm still, and again, I'm not. Maybe you're right. Maybe this is the absolute best we could have done it, but I will also go back to another Simon Hallett quote, which is that Dew Slip was where Simon said Dew Slip was brilliant at the football side of it in terms of providing support and strategic overview to the management team, but maybe not so much in terms of the executive side and the director side of negotiating contracts. That to maybe suggest that maybe the contract negotiation side could have been done better on them.
Can I just? I'm not having a go at you, Sam, but just putting this into context. Neil Tuesday, I know it was a surprise to me, which came out in what Simon said, wasn't responsible as director of football for negotiating contracts. That came as a surprise because I would have expected him to be first and foremost. So what they tried to do is get a sporting director, which is a horrible foreign term for somebody who's in charge of everything. And they failed to get that because, I mean, Music said he worked with 2 sporting directors. Well, bloody well, so what? You know, our structure now, ironically, contrary to what you say, I think is absolutely clear. Simon Hallett, non-executive chairman. That means he doesn't get involved. The person involved, or 2 people involved, are Tom Randall as the recruitment person and David Fox to finalise the negotiations, with Andrew Parkinson as the CEO signing it off. I think that is a very clear structure and a better one than we had with New Nip dipping in and out and pulling in players that he knew. What do you think about that? Because we are now recruiting players. Yes, they're development players, but I have much more confidence. And I have to be honest, David Fox has really impressed me. He's grown into the job. He's taking control of things. And yes, we haven't got our number 9 in yet, but I do actually have some confidence we will get players, because none of the other clubs are signing these players. Nobody else has signed a number 9 for £1 million, as far as I'm aware. So in the last few weeks, so there's a very small number of players available, and everybody's trying to sign the same sort of player. So I actually have confidence that our structure for a League One side is clear, and it will work far better than it was with I mean, the Music thing is, just coming back to one of the other points, when Music was appointed, we had a 92% chance of being relegated. In fact, Simon, I think he subliminally slipped into that in the fans forum and said, that's because it was a 92% chance. By the end of the season, I think he said it was 50-50. I don't think he got, but it was certainly a 60%. So by that measure, that was an improvement. And I think Simon, he sort of hinted at it, but he should have said that. He was hurt because, quite understandably, he's phoned up News to say, hey, what's this rumours about you going? And then he says, no, I'm happy you got everything in. And then literally the next day, his agent says, oh, well, Shaka want you. What's he going to do? It's just a shame he didn't have the balls to phone Simon up and say, look, I've got the opportunity of a lifetime. It's closer to my family. I've got to take it. If he'd done that, it would have been different, but he didn't.
I get it. And my final word on this little segment would be, because I'm sure Joe is probably keen to move it on to discussion around next season. So my final word on this segment would be, in response to Superintendent saying this is clueless logic. Well, look, man, I know we're in the comments, it's the place to debate, but try and tell me why it's clueless logic. Because ultimately, yes, players will want a release clause, but they will also want more money. And if you can trade off giving them more money against, not saying no release clause, against a higher release clause, there's no reason in my mind why they wouldn't be convinced to sign for the club in that. Because we're not saying they can't go if we go down. We're just trying to secure our assets and get a little bit more money for them. I think that with what's being reported, with Randall and Hardy in the area of 500 to 700k, if it's wrong, I'd love someone to come out and say it's wrong. But it's been widely reported by numerous media outlets.
And can I just say before you move on quickly, I was going to say this in response to Graham's thing. I also agree we should move on from this. If those widely bandied about figures were wrong, Simon Hallett would have said so on the podcast with the Pilgrims pod, I believe. What he actually said was fans are being unrealistic. He did not say that the amounts that are being publicly reported do not reflect reality. As far as I know, he would have been at complete liberty to say that, as he has said about other things, including that no one at the club has spoken to Gareth Bale. So I suspect those figures are probably accurate. But again, I did when I first raised it, caveat that with the fact that we don't fully know.
And I would agree with that. And my final word in it would be, yes, let's move on, but it's not whipping for the sake of whipping or, public shaming or whatever. It's let's learn a bit better. Now, I will retract one thing, which is where I said that it was maybe down to Neil Dusic's bad negotiating. Graham was quite clearly explained that I fully accept that maybe Neil Dusic wasn't responsible for doing that negotiation, but maybe that's the problem in itself. The person who was the main football person wasn't doing those negotiations. That would have fell to someone else, possibly Andrew Parkinson, possibly David Ray, possibly even the manager, who, obviously Schumacher at the time, who, with all respect, are not directors of football and would not have been maybe the most savvy people in the world to negotiate that. And all I want us to do as a club is take a learning from it. And the learning from it, I would say, is let's just hire the best possible people to do those negotiations. And I actually agree with Graham, even though I still have doubts about the structure in terms of how it plays out. It's very clear that David Fox is on the contract negotiation side. In terms of public speaking, at least, interviews he's done, and for me, having spoken to him personally, I agree David Fox is tremendously impressive. So let's hope he has done that and will continue to do that. But there is a bit of a mindset that, oh, well, it's just negotiation, it's just what happens. Well, if that's the case, then why don't both sides just, employ an AI to negotiate and then meet in the middle? My view on that, I'm being sarcastic, obviously they shouldn't do that, but my view on that is, being a good negotiator is a skill. Being someone who can sort of stare down someone over the other side of a table and sell the case convincingly to sign the deal is a skill. And it's a skill that I think went a little bit under the radar in that summer after promotion. And the one thing I would push back on Graham slightly, despite having been made to eat my humble pie and deduce it thing, is that in that title season, Adam Randall was, by the way, he signed it in the summer of 2023. In that 22-23 season, he started almost every game bar February to April when he was injured. Either side of that, he started, I think, almost every game. So he absolutely was a key player. So I think Randall, certainly to be offered a deal with that clause was tough to justify. Hardy, maybe a little more so, but still learnings to be made in my view. So we may have to agree to disagree on that one. And I will now, unless anyone else has a burning desire to make a point on that particular bone of contention, I appreciate the spirited debate and the comments coming in on one side or the other. I'll hand back to Joe.
It's very kind of you.
Joe, just quickly on the subject of release clauses.
I'm not going down that road again. I am not going to be dragged into blowing off hot air about release clauses. We've been there before. If people want to know my thoughts on release clauses, then you can watch our previous podcast where I it didn't go down well, my views, but hey ho, it's an opinion show. We are going to move it on because I think, a lot of the interview that Simon Hallett gave with Pilgrim's podcast was about the past, and now we all need to just look forward to the future. In doing so, as Graham alluded to earlier, there is one more point on the interview I just want to get thoughts on, and it does tie into next season, and then I will ask one final question. And it's about player signings and things. And we've already spoken extensively earlier on in the podcast tonight about squad depth and what might be needed, what's not required. And there's still 6 weeks of the window to go. As Graham said, we haven't used a single one of our 5 loan spots that are available to be in the starting or in the matchday squad. You can have, as we know, as many as you like, but only 5 in the matchday squad. One of the things that Simon Hallett was quite strong about in the Pilgrims podcast interview was the continuation of signing players of good value, and paying large transfer fees for players doesn't always pay off on average. There's always the outlier, but on average, it doesn't always pay off. Well, I think he was a little bit naive in the examples he was giving because we're not fishing for Coutinhos and Hazards and things. And I would argue that certainly the sum of money that the likes of Liverpool, Manchester City, etc. have paid in recent years have paid off because of the trophies they've won. But he said the point I want to go on about is you don't get good value in proven League One and Championship players. And that struck out to me a little bit. And Graham, going back to your point on marquee signings, everyone's been clamouring for that big name to come in up front, haven't they? They want that focal point and things. And I could think of one very obvious proven player at this level that was a good signing, and that was Alfie May when he went from Charlton to Birmingham, and the advantage he gave them, and even when he went to Charlton before that. So I think there is an advantage to signing proven players, but one thing we shouldn't lose sight of with our pandemonia and trying to get a striker in, as John alluded to a lot earlier on, we need to be smart and not get ripped off, don't we? And in the rest of the transfer window, that's going to be key with, as we already expect, a surplus of cash available to spend.
Yeah, Birmingham spent 25 million in getting promoted.
Yeah, they spent a lot of money on a penalty specialist. We know that, and they signed other players, but
yeah, Alfie May. When he was at Cheltenham, I think we expressed an interest in him then, but he had no interest coming so far south. But how much did he go to Charlton for?
I don't have the figure to hand. I don't know whether Sam might have it off the top of his head or not. But
It was in the
how
region.
much did he go to Birmingham for? I don't think it was the sort of high price figure that everybody says. So what are we looking at? We're looking to spend £1 million, get that magic £7 million figure, and we call that marquee and value for money. We just have to look at Bailey for that. I mean, crikey, we nearly bought him in August, and we were so desperate to buy him, we bought him in January when he clearly didn't fit the system we were going to play. I mean, that. So by all means, spend. But you name a player available at the moment in League One, League Two, or possibly Scottish Premiership that we could pay £1 million for plus as a number 9.
Well, somebody's suggesting one on screen, and Jerry Yates.
Yeah, I remember it was last season. That player went from Blackpool for £2.5 million to Hull. Do you remember? And he scored 1 goal and £2.5 million. So this we've got to spend £1 million. Doesn't cut it for me. I understand what Simon's saying, and it just popped up. Alfie May 290,000 for Charlton. That's what a great buy for Charlton. Then he went for over £1 million, didn't he, to Birmingham, I think. So
yeah.
So there are players just that are available, but I keep saying, name me a £1 million plus striker we should buy.
Is Andre Previn available?
Sorry,
Andre Previn. Well, we need someone who can play the piano, according to Sam. So, just wondering if he'll actually score all of the right goals, but not necessarily in the right order, and that's one for the older listeners.
Name me a player we should spend. I mean, there probably is one, Nathan Lowe, but he's reputedly 2.5 million. Should we spend 2.5 million on a 19-year-old who can't get in the Stoke first team?
I think so.
I think about
you
it, yeah.
Do?
Yeah,
I mean, somebody's just said
carefully.
about Macaulay Langstaff. Classic example. League Two player, scored goals for fun. Meant to Millwall, scored 1 goal in 25 games. He's 5'10". He's not what we need.
But
so I guess Graham, I would flip the question back on you then and say, because I genuinely think I'm absolutely right between the two of you here, which is that I don't really share Sam's obsession with like we must make marquee signings and they must be expensive. And I'm actually pretty content with the majority of the business that we've done this summer, if not all of it. I feel like in that position, you're going to have to get the checkbook out for someone who is going to be good enough. It's not about saying that, yeah, it's a guarantee if we spend £1 million that they will score X number of goals. Obviously, that can be a risk. And I wouldn't just go out and spend that money willy-nilly. And if the rumours are true, we have had the opportunity to spend that money on a player from Burton who, maybe we haven't because we don't think it's worth it. And I would accept that. I would agree that we don't want to be held over a barrel like that. But someone like Lowe, someone like Charlie Kelman, the sort of caliber of player with the sort of proven goal scoring record in the lower levels. Lowe, I guess, has less of a proven record in the sense that he did it in League Two, but he looks very exciting. And I wouldn't personally really hold not getting in that pretty dreadful Stoke team coming in halfway through a season, having just come from League Two against him. I think, given his age, actually, I do think £2.5 million. It would be a risk, but I think it could be a good investment. But I guess the question I would flip back to you then is, like, who would you suggest that we look at? What type of player would you suggest we look at who is not going to necessarily cost that much money?
The one player I've advocated, and it's come up on the screen a couple of times, is Alessiana Jetta. 22 goals, 6'4", immovable object, good finisher.
You don't think he's going to cost
$1 million? We bid for him 750 reportedly in January, so he must be on our radar. But then we signed somebody. I thought it was 3 games he's suspended, so he can't play in our first 5 games. So what are people going to say? Yeah, we signed a player, saved for $1 million, but he can't play until September.
Is it as many as 5 games he got banned for? Is it?
Somebody said, I think it's right. He got 3 for sending off, and then 3 for refusing to leave the pitch. And I do remember the refusing to leave the pitch.
Yeah, I know. I remember that. Now you say it. So
what do you say? Yeah, I mean, personally, it's a season long. Of all the players, and I've only looked at a show reel, his goals are good. He's 6'4". He's an immovable object. It's what we haven't got. And he can score goals, headers, left and right foot. He's an international player. He would be my choice. And
Were we not looking at him?
He's on our radar. But
were we not looking at him more from a Muslic style than a?
No, but we're going to be playing against teams who are going to be hitting the ball up in the air. We've got to defend long throws. I mean, Luton had 101 set plays against us, where Katic and Maxi won most of them. Tell me a player who's going to win most of the aerial duels we've got. I think Wiradou is good. I think he may do. But we've got a weakness at both ends of the pitch on height and physicality. It's got to be addressed.
Graham wants a 6'4" centre forward that, we can go up to £1 million to sign. Well, Sam Cosgrove was available on a free transfer. There's one for you.
Can I just quickly?
Look what he did for us in that role. I mean,
can I just say quickly that I think? Sorry, Graham. I think there's one other option we haven't considered here, which is that we're thinking about this all wrong, which is we're talking about signing one striker and debating the amount of money that should be spent on that player. And
we shouldn't get hung up on a broad figure of £1 million.
No, but what I'm saying, Joe, is that seems to be what the club and cleverly has indicated, right? It's like we are going to sign a number 9 who will be the clear first choice, and that's the player we're going to bring in. Is there a case that we should maybe think about, not spending £2.5 million on Nathan Lowe, or sort of a huge gamble sum on one player who has an unbelievable amount of quality and maybe a proven goal record, but all it takes is for them to snap their ankle in the first game of the season and it's a waste of money? Why not try and get in 2 players who have a somewhat proven goal scoring record at this level, who cost 500k each, or one of whom is Sam Cosgrove on a free because he might not be the main man, but we know his experience, we know he can do a job for us, and we know he gives a different dimension. I don't really understand why we need to limit ourselves to 3 strikers just because we're playing one up front. I mean, we're looking at a pretty tactically flexible unit under Cleverly, so I don't discount that we could change formation halfway through the season, and maybe there is a role for Peppel, for example, to come and play in a slightly more withdrawn role, as you were saying, Graham, in a 10 or behind the striker. I just wonder if we're sort of inevitably putting an enormous amount of pressure on the shoulders of whoever this person who comes in is. And they might sink or they might swim. Maybe just sort of sharing that load would A, lead us to more realistic targets, and B, remove a bit of the pressure and sort of diversify the risk of the signing, and we can then have 4 options to kind of rotate from up front. I wonder if that's a sort of overlooked.
No, I have some sympathy for that, but it isn't going to satisfy people who say we've got to spend a sum of money. It's got to be 7 figures, I think, to satisfy this need that we've got money and we need to buy somebody. And it's good. If it's going to be that amount of money, it's got to be a number 9. You're not going to pay it for a centre back, are you? So,
as somebody who doesn't hold exactly that view, but perhaps holds the view that could be most similarly categorised to being that view, for sure. I think there absolutely are players there who are worth a gamble, who could be very good at League One level. And for all my criticism I have sometimes had of Simon Hallett, the one criticism I've never really made is against his idea that we need to gamble to thrive. We are a club who, yes, we're relatively well off for League One level. When we get back into the Championship, we need to gamble. But if we just appoint, club manager who's been around the block, does a more or less, reasonable job everywhere without ever really excelling, and sign players of a similar effect, we will go down. So yes, we do need to make our signings on the younger side. Couldn't agree more. We do need to make our signings more towards resale value. Couldn't agree more. But that doesn't, and shouldn't, in my view, stop us from using our financial firepower, which we now have in a way we never had before. We've sort of been pretty consistently said top 6 budget as a minimum. And obviously...
That's wage budget, not transfer budget.
Sure, okay, but fair enough. But even so, then, if that very much the expectation we were given was we're going down and we're going to be one of the most well-off clubs in the league, and like with Simon's little slip up at the fan forum, And I think that, it's a little bit unfortunate with the fact that he said when rather than if, which is what people focused on. But I think what he did say after that gave a lot of comfort. If and when we do go down, we're going to be one of the big boys in the league. We're not going to have to, scrabble around on gambles anymore, and still have gambles to an extent, because if you sign a player who, for big money, who is likely to be, very good in League One, but if you go up to the Championship, then it's a gamble how well they step up. That still qualifies as being a gamble. But in my mind, the quote I heard about, we're going to continue signing players who are a bit of a punt, who are a bit of a risk, who represent good value for money, rather than spending large transfer fees. That, to me, was one of the bits that made me slightly tear my hair out a little bit, because we can absolutely sign players for transfer fees that are relatively high to the league, that still represent a gamble for when we go back up, and still represent potentially very high resale value. And if we can get Nathan Lowe in the region of 2 million, maybe even 2.5, I would be a little bit wary about going too far above that. But, 2 million, 2.5 at a push. Charlie Kelman, if we could get him for 2.5 million, even 3 million at an absolute push, we have the cash reserves there. We have the player trading income. That would represent potentially, yes, it would be a bit of a gamble in the sense we're paying such a large fee, but it's higher risk and higher reward. Because if they have a 25 goal season, if we then go back up and they, score 10 goals by Christmas in the Championship, we could easily be looking at 7, 8, 9 million for them and then that would represent a very big profit in terms of player trading. So I get it, I really do. And as we've all said, and I think this almost goes without saying now, I would much rather have the approach that Simon is taking than someone who's going to leverage the club against debt. But I do almost feel there is a bit of a middle ground in the sense of we don't have to withhold the money that's kind of sitting there in the bank account, but we also don't have to leverage the club with debt that we can't afford to pay back. There is that middle ground of spending the money we have, but not spending the money we don't have. And that's what I feel is a little bit lacking. And hopefully will be addressed if we bring in Nathan Lowe next week and, Ashley Young is doing the rounds, goodness me. But, if we bring in those two players, I'm not saying it will completely save the window, but it will certainly go a long way towards making it look a much better transfer window.
If the middle ground is to spend £5.5 million on 2 strikers, then I'm quite happy doing what we're doing, I think.
Well, no, that would be one or the other. It would not be that. It would be one or the other.
There's that famous meme that goes around that escalated quickly, and I didn't expect that debate to end in that fashion. That's about it, I think.
That's one of the liveliest pods we've done. all in good spirit, but I don't think I've ever recorded it was back and forth debate.
You know what? Genuinely, I strongly hope the 2,500 people who've tuned into that tonight have really enjoyed it, because I certainly have enjoyed listening to it. We're 90 minutes in. That'll just about do.
Joe, just quickly before we go, can I say something about relegation release clauses?
No. No, Aaron will cancel us if we talk once more about relegation release clauses. That's about it for tonight.
Can I just welcome Sam to the Passotti quiz team for...
I was just getting to that.
I do need to do one big thing. I promised this. A big happy birthday shout out to friend of the pod, Zach Brown, not the McLaren F1 chief executive, but the Zach who appears in our comments every week, reads all our stuff, watches all our stuff. Is a big friend of the pod. So happy birthday, Zach. Tomorrow, 2 years ago, tomorrow we signed Ballymumba for your birthday, didn't we? And if we can have as good a birthday present as that for you tomorrow, Zach, maybe Nathan Lowe, maybe Charlie Kelman, we can dream, You'll get that as your birthday present, and then you'll wake up about 2 minutes later. But anyway, happy birthday for tomorrow, Zach, and hope you keep enjoying our pod.
Happy birthday to Zach. And as Graham was mentioning before, I was just about to do so myself, Sam and Graham will be appearing in the next Plymouth Argyle quiz night on Friday night as part of Team Passotti. I understand from reading one of the posts on our Passotti thread that the Hallett are going to be taking part. There's also a senior Greens team, etc. I'm not sure, Graham. I don't know whether you can clear this up. Is there still spaces available?
I think so. I mean, it's incredibly competitive and extremely enjoyable. And
is that why you called Sam down?
Sorry?
Is that why Newell sent out a red beacon for Sam down?
There was an urgent need for Plymouth Argyle knowledge to bolster our team. So he was the obvious top level, almost £1 million signing. Almost.
He was the gamble of £2.5
Yeah,
million
yeah,
on a
yeah.
proven
We would have
proven
gone for
player.
John with the other one, but we decided not to.
Yeah. So yes, there are
One of us is
details of
Nathan
that.
Lowe, and which one of us is Charlie Kelman out of interest?
Oh, you're Nathan Lowe, definitely, Sam.
Well, I am slightly younger than John, only by a few months, so I'll take that.
There are details of said quiz night on Argyle's website and social media channels and via the Green and White podcast Pasotti thread. I think it's £5 per entry or £2.50 for season ticket holders. We will be back in situ next Sunday. Can you believe it already? It's the season preview show next Sunday. We will have a plethora of favourite Plymouth Argyle Green and White podcast faces for you. We'll have one or two little surprise guests along the course of the evening. It will be a long one, so if you are planning on watching something next Sunday, do Sky Plus it or whatever you have to do these days on Sky boxes on catch up to get your programs afterwards, because it's going to be a long show next week, because I suspect Sam will do a lot of talking. But we will be here for our season preview next week. At the start of that episode, we will recount Wednesday night's trip to Plainmoor and Saturday's homecoming of Adam Randall, who, of course, left for a reasonable release clause in his transfer fee. So,
and Joe, sorry, just on that, Joe.
Don't. So we will be recounting all of that, and then we will look forward to the 2025-2026 Sky Bet League One season. And I can promise you we will be back every week, same time, same place, for every league game. And unfortunately, we will also be doing review podcasts for the Virtu Trophy, although I will publicly declare now I will have absolutely nothing to do with them.
Me, first of all.
Well, we cover everything, Sam.
Dan Ellard will be hosting those, I believe. I understand.
Dan Ellard has offered to host them, I believe. Yeah. Sorry, not host. We've told him he is.
Joe, I'm sorry, but we might have to rethink that. I can't promise I'll actually be watching the game.
Well, you're going to have to appear on it, Sam.
Yeah, but are we going to get enough people who have done so?
Oh, sorry. We only get Sam's Corner viewers, don't we? I keep forgetting that. So you will be able to see us next season for all 46 games, the League Cup game. We've actually got a very special vlog coming for you for the QPR League Cup game, which we're all very excited about. That will be out after that and after a podcast on it. So do join us all for that. That is probably the longest outro I've ever done. Sam, John, Graham, thank you very much for your company this evening. Thank you to the 2,500 of you who have joined us this evening, and we will see you again in 7 days' time as we get ready for life back in League One. Night all.
Cheers.